In a busy international airport, the energy was electric. People rushed around like ants, dragging suitcases, checking boarding passes, and trying to find their gates before announcements blared over the loudspeakers. Amidst all this chaos stood a young woman with her toddler in tow. She looked just like any other traveler, dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, her hair pulled back into a messy bun, juggling a diaper bag while keeping an eye on her energetic child. What no one knew about her was that she wasn't your average passenger. This woman owned the airline operating the very flight she was about to board. Yes, you heard that right. She was a billionaire who had built her empire from scratch, starting with nothing but determination and hard work. But today, she wanted none of the fanfare or special treatment that usually came with being at the top. Today, she simply wanted to blend in, to experience life as an ordinary person for once. As she made her way through security, her little boy tugged at her hand, pointing excitedly at airplanes visible through the terminal windows. "Mama, look! Big plane!" he squealed, his face lighting up with pure joy. The mother smiled softly, feeling grateful for these small moments away from meetings, contracts, and endless responsibilities. For now, she could just be a mom. But not everything goes according to plan, especially when traveling. As they approached the gate, the line seemed longer than expected. Passengers were growing restless, some tapping their feet impatiently, others muttering complaints under their breath. Her son, unable to contain his excitement, started jumping around, accidentally bumping into a nearby luggage cart. The clatter drew annoyed glances from those waiting in line. Embarrassed, the mother quickly apologized and tried to calm him down. That's when things took a turn. A flight attendant stationed near the gate caught sight of the commotion. Known among colleagues for her sharp tongue and short temper, this particular crew member already appeared stressed out. Her uniform, a crisp navy blue dress with gold accents, was immaculate, except for a faint coffee stain near the hem, likely from dealing with demanding passengers earlier that day. She glanced at the clock, then back at the growing queue, clearly frustrated by the delay. When the toddler bumped into the cart again, spilling juice from his sippy cup onto her pristine shoes, something inside her snapped. "Can't you control your kid?" she snapped loudly, drawing attention from everyone nearby. The mother froze, stunned by the sudden hostility. Before she could respond, the flight attendant leaned forward aggressively, wagging a finger in her face. "You're holding up the whole line. Some of us have jobs to do, you know." The words stung, but what happened next shocked everyone, including the flight attendant herself. In a moment of uncontrolled anger, she raised her hand and slapped the mother across the cheek. The sound echoed sharply through the crowded area, followed by gasps and murmurs from onlookers. Time seemed to stand still. The mother staggered, slightly, clutching her reddened cheek, too stunned to speak. Her son clung tightly to her leg, wide-eyed and scared. For a second, the flight attendant realized what she'd done. Horror washed over her face as reality sank in. Panic set in almost instantly. What had she been thinking? How could she let her emotions get the better of her like that? She opened her mouth to apologize, but no words came out. Instead, she turned away abruptly, pretending to focus on organizing boarding passes, hoping against hope that the incident would blow over quickly. Meanwhile, the mother stood frozen, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to retaliate, to demand answers or even call airport security. But another part of her, the part that valued discretion and didn't want to make a scene, held her back. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. After all, losing her cool wouldn't help anyone, least of all her frightened child. So she silently picked up her belongings, wiped away a stray tear, and stepped forward to board the plane. Little did the flight attendant know, her actions had sealed her fate in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Because the woman she had humiliated wasn't just another disgruntled customer. She was the owner of the airline, the mastermind behind every detail of the aircraft they were about to fly on. And this slap? It was going to change both their lives forever. As the plane taxied down the runway, the tension inside the cabin was palpable. The hum of engines and the occasional chatter of passengers couldn't drown out the weight of what had just happened at the gate. The woman who had been slapped, sat quietly in her seat, her cheek still throbbing slightly from the impact. She stared out the window, watching the ground roll by as the aircraft prepared for takeoff. Her mind, however, wasn't on the clouds outside. It was replaying the incident over and over again. She thought about how quickly things had escalated. One moment she was just another mom trying to keep her toddler entertained while waiting in line. The next, she was standing there, stunned and embarrassed, after being struck by someone who clearly didn't know who she was. But that was the thing. She wanted it that way. She hadn't dressed up or announced herself as the owner of the airline. She wanted to experience life as an ordinary person, even if only for a few hours. And yet here she was, sitting on one of her own planes feeling anything but ordinary. Her son, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, was happily playing with a small toy car he'd brought along. He giggled softly, pushing the car back and forth on the tray table. His innocence was a comforting distraction, but it also made her chest tighten. What kind of example was she setting for him? Should she have said something? Called out the flight attendant for her behavior? Or would doing so have only made things worse? While she wrestled with these thoughts, the flight attendant who had caused the scene was grappling with her own storm of emotions. Back in the galley, hidden behind the curtain that separated first class from economy, she leaned against the counter, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. She could still hear the sharp crack of her palm hitting the woman's face, see the shock and pain in her eyes had haunted her. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, closing her eyes tightly. She knew slapping someone, anyone, was completely unacceptable, especially in her line of work. Flight attendants were supposed to be calm, professional, and empathetic under pressure. That's what the training manual said anyway. But today, she had let her frustration boil over into something ugly and uncontrollable. The worst part was, she didn't even know why she'd reacted so strongly. Sure, the kid had spilled juice on her shoe, but it wasn't like it was ruined. A quick wipe with a napkin would have fixed it. No, this wasn't about the juice or the delay or the stress of the job. This was about her own insecurities bubbling to the surface. She hated when passengers acted entitled when they seemed to think the rules didn't apply to them. And yes, maybe she'd jumped to conclusions assuming the mother was careless or rude. But deep down she knew none of that excused her actions. Word of the slap spread quickly among the cabin crew. Gossip always did on flights. By the time drinks were being served, everyone knew something had gone down at the gate. Some whispered sympathetically about that poor lady, while others defended the flight attendant, saying the mom probably deserved it. None of them realized the true magnitude of the situation. Not yet, anyway. For now, the flight attendant focused on doing her job, forcing a smile as she handed out snacks and refilled cups. But every time she passed the woman's row, her stomach churned. She avoided making eye contact, pretending to be busy rearranging blankets or checking seatbelts. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was looming ahead. Meanwhile, the woman continued to sit silently, her expression unreadable. To anyone else, she might have looked like just another tired traveler resting before the long journey. But inside, her mind was racing. She thought about all the hard work it had taken to build her company, the late nights, the sacrifices, the countless battles fought to prove herself in a male-dominated industry. And now, here she was reduced to feeling powerless because of one reckless act. But anger wasn't the emotion driving her. Instead, she felt a strange mix of sadness and curiosity. Sadness for the fact that such a trivial incident could spiral out of control so easily. Curiosity because she wondered what had pushed the flight attendant to act the way she did. People didn't lash out like that without reason, right? Maybe there was more to the story than met the eye. As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, she made a decision. She wouldn't confront the flight attendant, not yet anyway. For now, she would observe, letting the situation play out naturally. After all, this flight wasn't just any flight. It was part of her private fleet, specially designed for testing new safety features before its official launch. Every detail, from the ergonomic seats to the emergency lighting, reflected her vision and dedication. She had chosen this particular trip to personally oversee the final adjustments, blending into the background to ensure everything ran smoothly. And then it hit her, the irony of the situation. Here she was, flying incognito on her own plane, only to be treated like a nuisance by one of her employees. If the roles had been reversed, if she had walked onto the plane wearing a tailored suit and introduced herself as the boss, would the flight attendant have dared to raise a hand to her? Probably not. The realization stung, but it also gave her pause. Was this really about respect, or was it about perception? Did people treat others differently based solely on appearances? By the time dinner service began, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted slightly. Passengers settled into their routines, reading books, watching movies, or dozing off. The initial buzz of excitement and anxiety had faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of air travel. Even the flight attendant seemed to relax a little, though her movements remained stiff and mechanical. When the meal trays were cleared away, the woman decided it was time to make her move. She pressed the call button above her seat, signaling for assistance. Moments later, the flight attendant appeared, her face pale and her lips pressed into a thin line. She mustered a polite smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked up, meeting her gaze steadily. "Yes," she replied calmly, her tone measured, but firm. "I need to speak with the lead flight attendant. Please send them here." The request caught the flight attendant off guard. For a split second, she considered refusing, thinking perhaps the woman wanted to file a complaint or demand compensation. But something in her demeanor stopped her. There was no malice in her voice, no hint of anger or retaliation, just quiet authority. Reluctantly, the flight attendant nodded and hurried toward the front of the plane to fetch her supervisor. Back in the galley, the crew exchanged nervous glances. They knew something serious was about to happen, but none of them could predict what. As the lead flight attendant approached the woman's seat, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Whatever came next would change everything, for both the woman and the flight attendant who had crossed a line she never should have touched. The lead flight attendant approached the woman's seat with a mix of professionalism and unease. She was used to handling passenger complaints, but something about this situation felt different. The air around them seemed heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that made her step slower than usual. As she reached the row, she offered a polite smile, though it didn't quite mask the nervousness in her eyes. "Ma'am, I understand you wanted to speak with me?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with caution. The woman nodded, her expression calm but piercing. "Yes, thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for the lead flight attendant to lean closer. When she did, the woman lowered her voice just enough to ensure their conversation remained private. "I need to clarify something before we proceed further. Do you know who I am?" The question caught the lead flight attendant off guard. She hesitated, glancing at the woman's casual attire and wondering if this was some kind of trick. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Should I recognize you?" she replied cautiously. The woman studied her for a moment, then leaned back slightly, her gaze softening. "Let me rephrase that. This plane, this entire fleet, it belongs to me. I own the airline." For a split second, there was silence. The lead flight attendant blinked rapidly, processing the words, then realization dawned on her face, followed by sheer panic. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She straightened up abruptly, her hands trembling as she fumbled for a response. "Oh my goodness. I had no idea." "It's fine," the woman interrupted gently, raising a hand to stop her. "You weren't supposed to. I prefer to travel without drawing attention to myself, however." She paused, letting the weight of her next words sink in. "Your colleague, the one who slapped me at the gate, clearly didn't get the memo." The mention of the incident sent a fresh wave of anxiety through the lead flight attendant. She glanced toward the galley where the offending crew member stood pretending to organize supplies. "Ma'am, please allow me to assure you that such behavior is completely unacceptable. We'll address this immediately." "No need to rush," the woman interjected, her tone still measured but firm. "I've already decided how I want to handle this, but first, I'd like to speak with her directly, alone." The request left the lead flight attendant speechless. She hesitated, unsure whether bringing the two together was a good idea. What if things escalated further? What if the other crew member said or did something that made the situation worse? But the woman's demeanor gave her little room to argue. There was a quiet authority in her voice that demanded compliance. "Of course, ma'am," the lead flight attendant finally managed to say. "I'll bring her here right away." Back in the galley, the flight attendant who had caused the scene was already on edge. She could feel the eyes of her colleagues boring into her, their whispers growing louder with each passing minute. Every time someone walked past, she braced herself, expecting to hear bad news. So when the lead flight attendant appeared and motioned for her to follow, her heart sank. "What is it?" she whispered nervously, clutching the edge of the counter. "You need to come with me," the lead flight attendant replied, her tone clipped. "Now." The flight attendant's stomach churned as she followed her superior down the aisle. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Was she being called out in front of everyone? Would she lose her job on the spot? By the time they reached the woman's seat, her legs felt like jelly, and her palms were slick with sweat. When she saw who was waiting for her, her breath hitched. The woman looked up, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, until the woman finally broke it. "I assume you remember. What happened earlier?" she began, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "At the gate." The flight attendant swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Yes, ma'am, and I'm so sorry, I don't know what came over me. It won't happen again, I promise." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying her. "Do you even know who I am?" The question threw the flight attendant off balance. She shook her head, confused. "No, ma'am, should I?" A flicker of amusement crossed the woman's face, though it vanished almost instantly. "This plane, the one we're sitting on right now, is part of my company. In fact, I own the entire airline." If possible, the flight attendant turned even paler. Her knees buckled slightly and she gripped the seat in front of her to steady herself. "Oh my God. I had no idea." "That much is obvious," the woman said dryly. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze locking onto the flight attendant's wide, terrified eyes. "So let's talk about what happens next." The flight attendant opened her mouth to apologize again, but the woman raised a hand to stop her. "Before you say anything, let me be clear. I'm not interested in empty words. Apologies are meaningless unless they're backed by action. You crossed a line today, not just as an employee, but as a human being. That kind of behavior has consequences." Tears welled up in the flight attendant's eyes, spilling over as she struggled to hold herself together. "Please, ma'am, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just tell me what you want me to do." The woman regarded her for a long moment, weighing her options. Part of her wanted to fire the woman on the spot, to send a message to the rest of her staff that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated. But another part of her, a deeper, more compassionate part, recognized the value of second chances. Everyone made mistakes, after all. The question was whether this woman was willing to learn from hers. Finally, she spoke. "Here's what's going to happen. You have two choices. Option 1. You resign immediately, effective as soon as we land. Or Option 2. You take a 3-month leave of absence without pay, during which time you'll undergo mandatory anger management training and counseling. If you choose the second option, you'll also be required to write a formal letter of apology, not just to me, but to every passenger who witnessed your actions today. After that, you'll return to work, but you'll start at the bottom. No seniority, no privileges. You'll earn back your position through hard work and accountability." The flight attendant stared at her, tears streaming down her face. She knew she deserved whatever punishment came her way, but hearing it laid out so bluntly was overwhelming. Still, she managed to choke out a response. "I'll take Option 2, ma'am. Please give me a chance to prove I can change." The woman nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Good. I'll expect regular updates on your progress. And remember, this isn't just about saving your job. It's about becoming a better version of yourself, for your sake and for the sake of the people you interact with every day." With that, the matter was settled, at least for now. The flight attendant returned to the galley, visibly shaken but determined to turn things around. Meanwhile, the woman sat back in her seat, watching the clouds drift by outside the window. She felt a strange sense of relief, knowing she'd handled the situation fairly. It wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about growth. But as the plane continued its journey, she couldn't help but wonder, would the flight attendant truly rise to the occasion? Or would this moment define her in ways she couldn't yet imagine? The days following that fateful flight felt like an eternity for the flight attendant. Her world had been turned upside down, and every waking moment was consumed by regret and self-reflection. She replayed the incident over and over in her mind, the slap, the stunned look on the woman's face, the weight of those piercing words during their confrontation. It haunted her dreams and shadowed her thoughts, leaving her restless and overwhelmed. She started her suspension the day after landing, packing up her uniform with trembling hands. For the first time in years, she didn't have to wake up early, rush to the airport, or put on a smile for passengers. Instead, she found herself sitting alone in her small apartment, staring at the walls, unsure of where to begin. The anger. Management classes were scheduled to start later that week, but until then, she had nothing but time and guilt to keep her company. At first, she resented the punishment. Who was this woman to decide her fate? Why couldn't she just accept an apology and move on? These questions swirled in her head as she paced back and forth, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. But deep down, she knew the answers. The slap hadn't just hurt one person. It had shattered trust, violated boundaries, and exposed flaws in her character that she couldn't ignore. Slowly, begrudgingly, she began to admit to herself that maybe, just maybe, the consequences weren't entirely unfair. Her first session of anger management wasn't easy. Walking into a room filled with strangers who carried their own burdens made her feel vulnerable in ways she hadn't anticipated. The therapist greeted everyone warmly, creating a safe space for people to share their stories without judgment. At first, she kept quiet, listening intently as others spoke about moments when they'd lost control, moments that mirrored her own shame. One man talked about yelling at his child during a heated argument, only to realize later how much it scared them. A young woman confessed to throwing a plate across the kitchen after a fight with her partner, shattering not just the dish but also their relationship. Each story resonated with her in some way, reminding her that anger rarely solved anything. It only created more pain. When it was finally her turn to speak, her voice cracked under the weight of emotion. "I hit someone," she admitted, her eyes fixed on the floor. "A passenger on my flight. I thought she was being difficult, but it turns out..." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "She owned the airline. Everything spiraled out of control because I let my emotions take over." The group listened silently, their expressions a mix of surprise and empathy. No one judged her. Instead, they nodded in understanding, offering words of encouragement. One older woman even reached out to pat her hand gently. "We've all been there," she said softly. "It's not about what happened, it's about what you do next." Those simple words stayed with her long after the session ended. They gave her hope, planting a seed of determination to change. Over the weeks that followed, she threw herself into the program, attending every class and completing assignments with newfound focus. She learned techniques to manage stress, practiced mindfulness exercises, and explored the root causes of her anger. Through journaling, she uncovered patterns from her past, times when fear or insecurity had driven her to lash out. Understanding these triggers helped her see herself more clearly, flaws and all. While she worked on personal growth, the airline's HR department kept tabs on her progress. Regular check-ins ensured she was meeting expectations, both in terms of coursework and attitude. To her relief, they seemed pleased with her efforts, noting improvements in her communication skills and emotional regulation. Still, she knew the real test would come when she returned to work. Would her colleagues treat her differently? Could she regain their respect, or worse, the trust of passengers? Months passed, and eventually, the day arrived for her to step back onto a plane. Nervous didn't even begin to describe how she felt. Her stomach churned as she donned her freshly pressed uniform, the fabric stiff against her skin. Every step toward the gate felt heavier than the last, each breath shallow and shaky. What if she messed up again? What if no one forgave her? But when she boarded the aircraft, something unexpected happened. The lead flight attendant greeted her warmly, welcoming her back with genuine kindness. "Glad to have you here," she said with a reassuring smile. "You've worked hard for this." The words caught her off guard, bringing tears to her eyes. She nodded, too choked up to respond. As she took her place in the galley preparing snacks and organizing supplies, she noticed subtle changes in the way her colleagues interacted with her. There was still a hint of caution in their voices, but also encouragement, a shared belief that she could rebuild what she'd broken. Midway through the flight, she spotted the woman who had changed everything. Sitting quietly in first class, she looked just as unassuming as before, scrolling through documents on her laptop while sipping tea. Their eyes met briefly, and the flight attendant froze, unsure of what to do. Should she approach her? Apologize again? Or simply pretend nothing had happened? Summoning every ounce of courage, she walked over to the woman's seat. "Ma'am," she began hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to say thank you for giving me a second chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise I'm working hard to be better." The woman looked up, her expression softening. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, setting aside her papers. "Change isn't easy, but I can see you're trying. That matters." The sincerity in her tone brought fresh tears to the flight attendant's eyes. She nodded quickly, afraid her emotions might spill over if she tried to speak again. As she turned to leave, the woman added one final remark. "Remember, it's not about perfection. It's about progress." Back in the galley, the flight attendant exhaled deeply, leaning against the counter as the weight of the moment settled over her. She realized then that forgiveness wasn't something given freely. It had to be earned. And though the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, she now had a clear sense of purpose, to prove that she was capable of growth, redemption, and becoming someone worthy of trust. For the rest of the flight, she poured her energy into serving passengers with a level of care and attentiveness she hadn't shown in years. Smiles came easier, conversations flowed naturally, and even the most demanding travelers seemed satisfied with her service. By the time the plane touched down, she felt a flicker of pride, not for where she'd been, but for where she was headed. Little did she know, this journey of transformation was far from over. In fact, it was only beginning. Quen 2.5 Max. The flight attendant's return to work marked a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone around her. At first, she was hyper-aware of every move she made, every word she spoke. She double-checked herself constantly, terrified of slipping back into old habits. But as the days turned into weeks, something remarkable began to happen. The fear that had once paralyzed her started to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence. She wasn't perfect, far from it. But she was, learning how to navigate challenges without letting anger take control. Her colleagues noticed the change too. Where before she'd been quick-tempered and sharp-tongued, now she approached conflicts with patience and understanding. When passengers complained about delayed flights or misplaced luggage, instead of snapping back, she listened carefully and offered solutions. Her tone was calm, her demeanor professional, and her smile genuine. It was as if the woman who had once lashed out at strangers no longer existed, or rather, had evolved into someone entirely new. One evening, during a particularly chaotic red-eye flight, a passenger in economy class became irate when his meal order went missing. He raised his voice, demanding an explanation and refusing to settle down. The tension in the cabin grew palpable as nearby travelers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For a fleeting moment, the flight attendant felt the familiar surge of frustration bubbling up inside her. Her jaw tightened, and her hands clenched slightly around the tray she was holding. But then she remembered what she'd learned in therapy. Pause, breathe, respond, not react. Taking a deep breath, she approached the man with a composed expression. "Sir, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience," she said, her voice steady and sincere. Let me see what I can do to fix this for you. The man hesitated, caught off guard by her calm response. His shoulders relaxed slightly, though he still looked skeptical. It's not just the food, he muttered. It's everything. This whole trip has been a mess. She nodded sympathetically, leaning in just enough to show she cared. I understand how frustrating that must feel. Let's work together to make things right, okay? By the end of the conversation, the man's anger had melted away. He even apologized for losing his temper, thanking her for handling the situation so gracefully. As she walked back to the galley, one of her co-workers gave her a thumbs up. That was impressive, they whispered. You handled him like a pro. The compliment warmed her heart, but more importantly, it reinforced her belief that she was on the right path. Each small victory reminded her why she'd fought so hard to keep her job, and why she couldn't afford to slip back into old patterns. Meanwhile, the woman who owned the airline continued to observe quietly from the sidelines. Though she rarely traveled incognito anymore, she kept tabs on the flight attendant's progress through reports from HR and occasional updates from senior staff. What intrigued her most wasn't just the improvement in performance, it was the transformation in attitude. The flight attendant had gone from being defensive and combative to compassionate and solution-oriented. It was clear she was putting the lessons from her training into practice and thriving because of it. One afternoon, while reviewing quarterly evaluations, the woman came across glowing feedback about the flight attendant. Passengers praised her attentiveness, colleagues highlighted her teamwork, and supervisors noted her leadership potential. Something clicked in her mind. Why not give her a chance to step into a bigger role? After all, the best way to solidify growth was to challenge someone with responsibility. A few days later, the flight attendant received an unexpected invitation to meet with the airline's CEO, the same woman whose life she'd once disrupted. Nervous excitement coursed through her veins as she stepped into the sleek office overlooking the city skyline. The woman greeted her warmly, motioning for her to sit. I wanted to talk to you about your future here, the woman began, cutting straight to the point. You've come a long way since our last encounter. Your progress has been impressive, and I think it's time we gave you an opportunity to grow even further. The flight attendant blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. What do you mean, ma'am? The woman smiled faintly, leaning forward slightly. We're looking for someone to lead our new hire training program. Someone who can teach incoming employees how to handle stress, resolve conflicts, and maintain professionalism under pressure. You've lived through those challenges and you've overcome them. Who better to guide others than someone who understands firsthand what it takes? For a moment, the flight attendant was speechless. She hadn't expected anything like this. A promotion, yes, but not one that carried such significance. Leading a training program meant shaping the next generation of flight attendants, instilling values of empathy and accountability. It was a chance to leave a lasting impact, to turn her mistakes into something meaningful. I don't know what to say, she stammered, tears welling up in her eyes. Thank you. Thank you for believing in me. There's no need to thank me, the woman replied gently. This is your second chance and you've earned it. Just remember, leading others starts with leading yourself. Keep growing, keep learning, and never stop reflecting on your journey. Over the next few months, the flight attendant threw herself into her new role with passion and purpose. She designed workshops, wrote manuals, and delivered lectures with a confidence she never thought possible. Her sessions weren't just about rules and regulations, they were about humanity. She shared her story openly, using her past mistakes as examples of what not to do. To her surprise, many trainees found inspiration in her honesty. They saw her not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that redemption was possible. Her favorite part of the job, however, was mentoring individuals who struggled with similar issues. Whether it was a rookie overwhelmed by the demands of the job or a seasoned crew member grappling with burnout, she approached each person with compassion and wisdom. She taught them breathing techniques to stay calm during turbulence, both literal and metaphorical, and encouraged them to view challenges as opportunities for growth. As time went on, The flight attendant became a beloved figure within the company. People sought her advice, trusted her judgment, and admired her resilience. Even those who had once doubted her ability to change now looked up to her as a role model. Her transformation wasn't just personal, it was contagious, inspiring others to strive for excellence in their own lives. And yet, despite all the success, she never forgot where she'd come from. Every time she boarded a plane or stood in front of a classroom, she carried the memory of that slap, the moment that had shattered her world and ultimately rebuilt it. It served as a reminder of how far she'd come and how much farther she could go. Little did she know, her story was about to reach an even wider audience, one that would cement her legacy in ways she never imagined. Years passed, and the story of the flight attendant who slapped a passenger and later discovered that passenger was the owner of the airline became the stuff of legend within the aviation industry. It wasn't just gossip whispered in break rooms or over coffee breaks. It had evolved into something bigger, a tale of redemption and personal growth that resonated far beyond the confines of an airplane cabin. The story spread through word-of-mouth interviews and even articles, capturing the attention of people from all walks of life. The flight attendant herself never sought fame or recognition for what she'd been through. In fact, she often downplayed her journey, preferring to focus on the work she was doing now rather than dwelling on past mistakes. But eventually, her story found its way into the public eye when a popular business magazine decided to feature her as part of a special issue on leadership and resilience. The headline read, "From Conflict to Compassion, How One Mistake Changed Everything." At first, she hesitated to participate. Reliving those painful memories felt like reopening old wounds, and she worried about how others might judge her. Would they see her as weak? As someone unworthy of forgiveness? Or worse, would they dismiss her achievements because of where she'd started? But then she remembered why she'd agreed to lead the training program in the first place. To show others that no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back up. If sharing her story could inspire even one person to believe in second chances, it would be worth it. The interview took place in a quiet corner of the airline's headquarters, surrounded by photos of planes soaring above clouds and awards celebrating decades of excellence. The journalist asked thoughtful questions, allowing her to share not only the low points but also the moments of triumph along the way. She talked about the slap, the split-second decision that changed everything, and the shame she felt afterward. She described the anger management classes, the late nights spent journaling, and the small victories that slowly rebuilt her confidence. And most importantly, she spoke about the woman who had given her a second chance, emphasizing that true accountability comes not from punishment, but from opportunity. When the article was published, it struck a chord with readers around the world. Social media lit up with comments praising her honesty and courage. Some shared their own stories of making mistakes and finding redemption, while others expressed gratitude for the reminder that everyone deserves a chance to grow. One commenter wrote, "This is proof that our worst moments don't define us. It's what we do after them that matters." As the story gained traction, requests for speaking engagements began pouring in. At first, the flight attendant turned them down, unsure if she was ready to step onto such a big stage. But the woman who owned the airline encouraged her to embrace the opportunity. "You've already inspired so many people within this company," she said during a casual lunch meeting. "Imagine what you could do if you took your message to the world." With that vote of confidence, she accepted her first invitation, a leadership conference aimed at empowering women in male-dominated industries. Standing on stage in front of hundreds of attendees, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, but when she began to speak, her voice rang clear and strong. "I'm not here to tell you I'm perfect," she started, pausing to let the words sink in. "In fact, I'm living proof that none of us are. We all make mistakes, big ones, small ones, ones we regret for the rest of our lives. But here's the thing. It's not the mistake that defines us. It's what we choose to do next." She went on to recount her journey, holding nothing back. She described the frustration and fear that led to the slap, the humiliation of facing consequences, and the hard work it took to rebuild trust. She admitted to moments of doubt, times when she wondered if change was even possible. But she also celebrated the breakthroughs, the friendships she'd formed, and the fulfillment she found in helping others succeed. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. People lined up to thank her, some tearing up as they shared how her words had touched them. For the first time, she realized the full impact of her story, not just on herself but on everyone who heard it. Back at the airline, her growing popularity brought positive attention to the company as well. Passengers praised the professionalism and kindness of the crew, crediting the training program for setting a new standard in customer service. The woman who owned the airline watched proudly as her vision came to life, not just in terms of profits, but in creating a culture of empathy and accountability. She often joked that hiring the flight attendant had been one of the best decisions she'd ever made, though deep down, she knew it wasn't luck. It was about seeing potential where others saw failure. For the flight attendant, life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. She traveled extensively, giving talks at schools, corporations, and community events. She wrote a book detailing her experiences, which became a bestseller. Yet despite all the accolades, she remained grounded, never forgetting the lessons she'd learned. Every time she boarded a plane, she greeted passengers with the same warmth and humility that had earned her respect years ago. And as for the woman who had once been slapped, she too reflected on how much had changed. What started as a moment of conflict had blossomed into something beautiful, a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to growth. They weren't close friends exactly, but there was a bond between them, forged in adversity and strengthened by forgiveness. One day, during a rare quiet moment at the airport, the two crossed paths unexpectedly. The flight attendant smiled, warmly approaching the woman with genuine gratitude. "I just wanted to say thank you again for everything. You didn't have to give me a second chance, but you did. And look where it's taken me." The woman returned the smile, her eyes softening. "It wasn't my decision alone. You're the one who put in the work. Don't forget that." They stood there for a moment, two very different people united by a shared understanding that life is unpredictable, messy, and imperfect, but also full of opportunities to rise above it all.